Hi and welcome to Lead a Horse to Water, the equine training and behaviour podcast. And as always, I'm your host, Trudy Dempsey. Today, I'm joined by Christa and Taylor Culbert, sisters, horse trainers, and the hosts of the Pony Girls podcast. Their podcast offers a genuinely unique look at the horse world, bringing together science, academic literature, and the arts to question how we understand horses. Christa is a horse trainer based in Bellingham, Washington. She has a background in fine art and is currently completing a master's degree in applied animal behaviour and welfare. Her training and consulting work focuses on equine welfare, building joyful relationships and supporting horses who struggle to fit into the domestic world, particularly unhandled horses and the amazing people who care for them. Taylor is a horse trainer and an English professor living in the Hudson Valley in New York State. She recently completed her PhD in theatre and performance, with research focused on animals in performance and the cultural narratives that shape human-animal relationships. Her academic work is closely informed by her hands-on experience with horses, and she currently runs a positive reinforcement training program at a local equine rescue. So hello, Taylor, and hello, Christa. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Trudy.
Thanks for having us.
Well, it's only fair because you invited me on your wonderful podcast, and so it's really lovely to return the favour. Now, today we're going to talk about choice, which is a really wide topic, but it's come at a really good time for me because I've just finished a Fenzi dog sport course where I snagged a gold spot, and so I've been having intense eyes on my training with my dogs. And it was all about choice, control, habit. So it's really a perfect time for me. And I know that you both have really, really good thoughts about the topic around choice. So as always, first time on the podcast, I'd love you, maybe Taylor, you'll go first, just to mention a little bit about how you got into the way you train with horses now. I'm going to signpost people to your very first episode of your own podcast because I know you talk a lot about family and how you got to where you are, which I found was a really lovely listen. So I will, that's sort of like your shared history, but maybe you could perhaps come a bit more up to date. Whatever, people love to hear about where you are, how you got there. So Taylor first.
Yeah, so, Krista and I both grew up riding traditionally, dressage mostly. And then when I was in graduate school in New York City, I adopted my dog, who was running around behind me. And she was terrified of the world. I could only get her to eat every few days. She could barely go outside. She was having a really hard time. And I found the positive reinforcement dog training place. And so I took one of their classes, and then I ended up sort of interning there. And I was just fascinated by it. And I was helping with their classes, and I read their entire bookshelf of books. And so then 5 years ago, I moved out of the city and found my way back into the horse world. And I was like, well, of course, this is how I'm going to train horses now. And the rest is kind of history. So then I played around with other people's horses for about a year, and then I found my way to the horse rescue, where I currently train horses and I run some positive reinforcement programs for the volunteers.
Which is fabulous. And I love that so many of us found these methods with dogs. The lovely thing by the time you found it with dogs is that there were people already doing it with horses, which is fantastic. So we've already got that seed sort of sown. So Christa, over to you.
Yeah, I like Taylor said, we kind of grew up in the horse world that we were in, kind of dressage kind of horse world. And ever since I left there, I was always just kind of looking for other ways of doing things. Reading every book I could, looking at classical dressage. I've stumbled upon natural horsemanship, just kind of always looking for, is there a better way that I could do this? And I had a lot of feelings of guilt about the way that I worked with horses, and I've let those go. Which is good. Yeah, I was just always looking for something different. But I do remember Taylor had gotten into positive reinforcement training with her dog, Bia. Mm-hmm. She was like, hey, Christa, this could be really cool. And I was like, no, that doesn't work.
Christa, Karen Pryor's Reaching the Animal Mind for Christmas.
Yeah.
And that changed.
And I read that, and I was like, oh, this does work. I was like, yes, okay, now I need to learn about this.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I had been, working for various horse programs as a trainer and instructor. And at that point I was like, okay, I think maybe I should get my own horse so that I can really delve into this and explore this. And so that's when I adopted my horse Sage from rescue. She was about 20 when I adopted her and didn't have basic handling or anything. And then that's kind of been the learning journey since. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. And what I love about you two is that you swap notes all the time, and I think that has speeded up your learning so much because you have each other's experience. And I think it's lovely. And I think it's very hard to find somebody that you can feel that comfortable and that close with. Obviously sisters, that works really well, but I think that is something that we can be missing in our industry, particularly I like to think of it as an art form, but I'm not sure that the outside world sees it as that. But yeah, I love that. I wrote down when you were talking though, Christa, guilt. And I think if anybody's listening who hasn't found their way, I don't know how you found my podcast, but if you have, you're very welcome. And to say that I think all of us have been through that period of why didn't I, what stopped me thinking about this? And often because somebody amazing like Karen Pryor has come before you and you think, oh, I wish I'd been a Karen Pryor. Why didn't I spot that this? But, the world, we're all meant to be here for different reasons, I'm sure. And so please don't, anyone who's listening, feel guilty. So I guess if we're going to move into talking about choice, we ought to kind of define it, or at least think about what it means to each of us. So if I do the boring bit and say that, by definition, I guess choice is having more than one thing on offer. If I've only got one thing, then I have zero choice. But what might we think of choice being for our horses, do you think? I don't know who wants to take that first. There's so much to say. I'm sure you'll both be able to say plenty.
Christa, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about choice. And thinking, like you were saying, that kind of the basic definition is that there's more than one option, right? And I think that could look like the horse can engage or not. I think the current science is now looking beyond that, it seems like, and saying, how do we have a genuine choice where there's actually more than one way to access what's valuable to the horse? So that's not a choice where you engage or not. That's a choice where there's multiple ways to engage, or multiple ways to gain distance, multiple ways to gain the food, whatever is important to the horse. And so, yeah, I think there's kind of different ways to look at it. But I do think that as a horse trainer, even the choice to engage or not, even if there's a bit of an element of the horse being torn about that decision, I think it's still important for us to have that layer of understanding that at least is some choice compared to being tied to a pole, where you cannot choose to not engage or not. So I think there are all different levels of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I love the fact that you're saying, although we can do better than, do it or don't, that's a good place to start for people who haven't yet got into the plethora of choice we might offer our horses about doing things. So I think that's really important. Thanks, Christa. Taylor, did you want to add anything to Christa's words there or take it further?
I think Christa just really eloquently said what I've been trying to wrestle with, because I think that when I first started, particularly working with horses with positive reinforcement, I think I was very much like, well, my horse is choosing to engage with me, so they're choosing this thing. But in retrospect, I was also using food that was much too high value for the horse I was working with. I'm thinking particularly about my own horse, Theo, and I don't think he saw it as a choice. I think that I'm much more conscious now about trying to give him options that feel like they are real things that he actually wants. And also I don't train with, I really try to find food that's not high value for him.
Yeah, and that's a really hard one. And I think there's still so much information out there, especially around dogs. I can't remember what I was reading the other day, but part of the advice and the equipment was high value treats. And I was like, I certainly don't want any horse people taking that. That's not to say that there are times with certain horses that you might be able to up the value, but we're always looking on the how boring can this be, because we don't want the horse to be frustrated by it, and we do want to offer the choice that is, as Christa says, very real. It's not the only way I'm getting the best thing I'm going to have today is by doing the thing I don't want to do. I
Mm-hmm.
love both of your thoughts there. Can we think about, before we go into training, because obviously that's our wheelhouse, the three of us are, massive into training and offering choice in training. But I wonder if people aren't ready to start offering choice in their training, which is a big one. And I hope people will leave this episode with some ideas. I think for some people it will be a big one, and that's very hard. So can we think about where we might offer choice in our horses' lives outside of the training environment? I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on how we can do that, Taylor.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I recently briefly moved my horse Theo to a farm closer to me before bringing him back to where he was previously, because it's actually a better place for him. But one thing that I realized when I moved him, he was in a paddock where there was one place to eat food, one hay station, one watering station, and a shelter. So of course he had his needs met. He had forage 24/7, but it was boring. And in the field where he lives now and where he was previously, they put hay out, and they put it out in multiple piles. And I think even that, which is, I mean, there's also 10 horses in that. It's a huge paddock, but there's 10 horses out there. And just putting it out in multiple piles, when I stand out there and I watch the horses, they do a lot of switching piles. They walk around, they try the different piles. So not only are they moving, but it's just a really simple way that they're getting choice in their daily life. Which pile of hay do I want to eat? Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
who
that's
do
one
I
way.
want to eat with? Am I going to stand next to my buddy and eat? Or do I want to be with the quiet bunch who stay more stationary if I'm not a mover quite today? Yeah, I love that. And how about, other things do you think, Christa, within, sort of offering hay? Can we? Not all of us can offer choice. Some of us who can control all of the horses that they live with, hay content of their diet, maybe they can choose to give different things. But, there are different forages that we might be able for some of our horses, or different ways maybe of getting them, like Taylor's saying, pile on the floor, or we could have other options perhaps.
Yeah. I recently had experience with this because currently I'm boarding my horses, and overall it's, I think as good as it could be, but it's still challenging. Like, they run out of hay overnight, and they're in kind of individual pens at night with a shelter, and so very limited choices for a long portion of the 24-hour cycle. And so I started with just like one hay net and hay on the ground, and partly because that's kind of what the people managing the barn will do, and I was just seeing a lot of food stress in my horses and frustration, and they just did not seem very happy. And I changed it, so now I go in the evening, and I have a whole bunch of different hay nets and hay balls, and I stuff hay in the cracks of the stall and in the roof. And so I basically just, even though it's the same hay, it's really interesting to watch them. The hay nets have different size holes. There's hay ball. Is that, like, Aoife, one of my horses, will just take a bite out of each and just keep circling around, even though it's in this very small, like, stall-sized area. And so, it was a good learning for me, because I was thinking, before I did it, like, how could this make that much difference? It's still not a great environment. Like, I was just thinking, like, well, it's not what I ultimately want, like, because she's still kind of stuck in this very small space and is going to run out of hay. And I was amazed at what a big difference it made for her. And I think there's, maybe a lot of reasons for that. Partly the choice, and maybe partly also just posturally. There's all different heights to eat it at now. She really loves the ones that are up high. Like, if I put it in the hay balls up high, hanging from the ceiling or in the roof, she loves that. And I was also surprised that she doesn't go for the ones with the biggest holes first. Like, she kind of just rotates around and tries them all. Even I have one that has, like, pretty small holes that I hope will last her through more of the night, And she eats that one the same amount as the others, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And what I love about that is that has surprised you. And I think, part of choice and offering choice is being surprised as the human part of the equation. And, a lot of people say, well, I gave choice and they didn't take it. I might have tried some different flavoured waters, some different soaked hays and things, and they just didn't like it. well, we don't always know it's that they don't like it particularly. It might take some while for them to want to take that choice of forage, that different choice. And I think it's really important that we get away from being human in this and saying, oh no, they didn't like it. We don't know that they didn't like it. It might be taking them a while to get used to the idea that there is choice. But even so, the fact that there's choice of you don't have to have it if you don't want it, I think is fantastic. Nobody's forcing these horses to reach up high and get hay. That's a really nice idea. I love that. But yeah, just having as much choice as you can. What happens though when we can't give horses choice? Because it's very hard, isn't it? We can't, Christa, you're saying, boarding. How can you, or here in the UK, a livery, how can you make those choices? But of course, you've just given a really good example. You can kit your stable, your barn area, your stall area. You can kit it out with as many different ways to offer choice of receiving the same food, which I think is really, really great advice.
Yeah.
What about things like choice for horses with their field mates? Can we ever allow horses a choice to be in with who they want to be, or do you feel that always has to be human controlled? What are your thoughts on that, Taylor?
Well, I know Theo, if it were up to him, he would live in a field of mares, which but just for logistical reasons, that's not possible where I am right now.
Yeah.
But I mean, I will say, like, at the rescue that I volunteer and work at, they have 200 horses, and yeah, a lot of horses.
It's a lot.
And they do really sort of watch and say, oh, is this, I'm always impressed by how they really do a good job taking care of those horses when there are so many, and especially even when so many are not easily handleable. But they really do a good job, I think, with the herds and watching and saying, oh, you know what, this herd is not working for this horse. The other horses are not letting him into the shelter. They're not letting him eat hay. So let's move him to a different paddock and see if that's better. And so I don't know that that's really the horse's choice, but it is maybe accounting for their experience.
Yeah.
And actually,
which is important. Yeah.
We did have one horse who was brought in, and she was often, we sort of initially turn them out in the arena while we get to know them. And there's a paddock on the backside of the arena, and our barn manager could not get her to come in. She was like, no, I'm not leaving. No, I'm not leaving. And he was like, what does she want? And so she marched him right over to the paddock, and he put her out there, and she was happy as could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. She said, no, I want to live in that paddock. He was like, okay.
So I guess in the perfect world, and this is when you guys get your own place together and, you can finally do absolutely everything that you want to. The choice could be, if it's possible, you've got a side of track or dry lot that's available on one side with certain horses in, and you're putting another horse out, and they can choose maybe which group they go with that day. But fair enough for most people, unless you have your own place, that's going to be pretty tricky to offer that choice. But I suppose we could still offer choice in making sure that we maybe have hedges or maybe even shelters that break the area up so that horses that don't get on perhaps could get away from the horse that they don't want to be around, and could and as you said, Taylor, putting food down, forage down in such a way that they don't have to eat with a horse that they're maybe not so comfortable with. So there's lots of potential, I think.
Yeah,
but we have to start looking for it, don't we?
One other thing I was thinking about, like, I really love the space that Theo, my horse, is in right now. It's a space at the rescue. They are very generous and let me keep him there. But it's a 5 or 6 acre paddock, and it has a big hill with basically a stand of trees on it. And then there's also trees around the paddock. So there's often multiple options for shade as well. And you see the horses picking who they want to hang out with in which shady spot. So there are some horses who hang out in the trees, some who hang out on the shady edge of the paddock, and some who hang out in the shelter, especially in the summer. And so I think just thinking about that, and of course that's difficult if you have a field with no trees, but just having multiple options for them in terms of shelters.
And I think we'll leave the conversation there, I think, as we could go on for hours just on that topic, but just to say that I think we need to move the horse conversation on Not that I can't do it, but how can we do it in the future? If we're going to keep horses and we're going to be better informed about how they need to be kept, then, we need to start addressing those problems. And it's not easy for everybody shouting at their listening device right now. We know it's not easy, but we have to start scratching the surface and beginning that as soon as we can, I think. Yeah, so let's get on to what I really would like to pick your brains about, Jay, and that is your thoughts on offering choice. Now, obviously, I've seen a fair bit of your training recently, Christa, and I know how much you're trying to encourage choice into your regular training, especially with some pretty difficult horses. So again, before anyone's shouting at the podcast, Christa's not doing this with horses who are easy. And also Taylor, who's working with perhaps horses that have come from difficult backgrounds. Again, we're not talking about these being necessarily the easiest horses in the world to offer choice to. First of all, maybe both of you could give me an example of the type of training you've been doing and what sort of choice you felt able to offer within that. And then we can maybe look at how we can create that and the problems that it does or doesn't help or create. So maybe Taylor, you'd like to go on that one first?
Sure. With with one of the horses, a pony that I was working with, and unfortunately we actually just lost him. But he was really intense about food. And he was a pony that we were using in my soft landings program, which is my positive reinforcement program for our senior horses at the rescue. And so I have folks who basically I give them a lesson once a week and with one of the senior horses, and we do just gentle enrichment exercises using positive reinforcement. And so this pony was really intense about food. And by that, I mean, if you walked him into the ring and there was you'd had a horse in there before and there were drips of alfalfa juice in the snow, he would get stuck to that and paw at it and eat it and would not leave it. So there was a lot of emotion around food. So for a while, I said, okay, maybe we try not using food with him. Maybe we just use gentle negative reinforcement, but that didn't work because if there was a speck of hay in the ring, he would latch onto it and couldn't leave the place where it was. So I talked to Christa about this. I was like, what do I do? So what we ended up doing is I set up a circle of hay piles. And first they were very close together. And so we just practiced, can we walk from one hay pile to the next hay pile? So he had lots of food options around him. And that worked really well for him. And I think we got to do that twice before we just lost him a week ago. But that was a very promising setup. And it really gave me some good ideas, I think, for horses that have that, because at a horse rescue, especially with horses that have backgrounds of having been starved, you have some horses that have really big feelings about food. And I think that just gave me a really good sense of a good starting place for that, seeing his response to that. And that he could choose to walk to the next hay pile or not.
There's no pressure. It's just in your time, and you get that idea of that pattern forming where I come in and I just move. It's not, nothing is too big a thing. I'm just moving from one pile of hay to another. I love that. It's a really great example. Christa, you're probably going to be stuck thinking of examples because you barely offer any choice in your training, she says sarcastically. But no, I certainly with the Mustangs, obviously with your own horses, I know you offer choice. I know Taylor does as well. But, maybe thinking of one of the more difficult situations like Taylor has there, because, those are the hard ones. The easy ones are offering a horse that's used to training with food. And we'll get onto that later. I'm not going to not give people advice about how they might offer choice with their horses. But I think if we show them that there are some difficult situations and you can still offer choice and how powerful it is, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so there's a group of horses I'm working with. There's 8 horses in a 13-acre field. And I've been working with them for a little over a year now, and most of them are Mustangs, and they all have some sort of need in terms of training. Some of them we can halter, and I can trim a fair number of them now, but there's still a few there's one who I still cannot touch, and a couple who we can't halter or do hoof care. And so I think what's really interesting about choice is that there is this push and pull between we need to get these things done. Like for the overall welfare of the horse, we need to be able to do hoof care. We need to be able to do medical needs. Like if I show up and one of the horses has a gaping wound, then what do I do if I can't handle that? And so I think that there is this real conflict sometimes between wanting to offer choice and also feeling this pressure of, but this isn't, I get it when people say, but what do you do in an emergency or something if you offer choice? Because I get it that there is this real pressure that we are the ones responsible for caring for these horses. And the term that Taylor and I have used sometimes is the entanglement of domestication, that we are deep in this entanglement. And, I think in an ideal world, we wouldn't be so responsible for their welfare. I think they would be able to care more for themselves. And so I think that's kind of like just laying the foundation for the complexity of how we might think about choice. What's interesting with these horses, and I find this time and time again with these horses, is that when I start to take away their choice and try to push a little bit, it backfires. And I end up setting myself weeks back in training. And I think this is kind of one of the differences between horses that work really well for people and horses that end up unwanted, is that the horses who I think are pretty easy to work with, you can push a little bit out of their comfort zone or maybe take away a little bit of choice, and the horse is like, that wasn't so bad. And the horses who are trickier to work with, push half an inch farther than you're like, maybe I'll just try half an inch farther. And you're like, oh, well, I wish I hadn't done that.
Yeah, this is not going to work. Yeah.
And so they are in a 13-acre field. And so one of my first challenges when I got there was even how am I going to separate them out for training? And yeah, so one of the horses, just for a particular example, one of the horses has been to 5 trainers previously. He's a Mustang, and he was very not responsive to anything, like shut down. And he's become more and more responsive and in turn scared of literally everything. People, halters, any object you hold, a brush, anything. And so one of the things I've been working on with him is haltering so that when the vet comes or something, we can sedate him and get his needs taken care of. And so partly thinking about what is valuable to him. And so like using cat, so like using distance if that's what's valuable to him. And at the same time, I think assessing where his comfort level is with cat and then using food at his comfort level. And so if that makes sense. And so, because I do think sometimes I've played with cat a fair bit, and sometimes I think if I was only using cat, it would take me like years.
Yeah, I understand that. That's mainly because of the type of horses that you're working with. And I think as well, to be fair to you, the limited time that you have with each one on a regular basis is not, these horses aren't living in your backyard and you being able to pop out and do 5 minutes twice a day. It's not, you are having to go independently and train with them, and time is of the essence, obviously, I know, for most of these situations. So in fairness to you, those are not easy situations to bring around change quickly with cat. I do think sometimes if you can do it on that very regular basis, and you have maybe the client can do it as well, that it can progress a bit more quickly, but it can be very, very slow. I'm going to just hold for 1 second because my dog wants to exercise some choice and go out of the office. So 1 moment while I just let her exercise that choice. There we go. It's always a bad idea letting the dog stay in with me because there's nearly always a moment at which they say, nah, we're bored, we're on. So I think, it's cat's a great thing. I will put some links to cat in this episode because I've spoken about it before. But I think it's a really important thing that eventually you really need to look at the positive reinforcement on top of it to really make that difference, don't you? So give us an example, maybe, of how, we often talk about this as being like a conversation with the horse that, they know that when you walk in, you are going to stop when they don't find it comfortable. And then that progresses to a point where you might be stood very close to them and they're choosing whether you are able to touch them or move the head collar close to them or something like that. Is that kind of what you're talking about in this case with the horses you're working with?
Yeah, definitely. So I kind of have two different training areas. So one is just in a big field with everyone, and I don't use food in that context. And so in that context, I'll be doing more like cat, gentle, basically gentle pressure and release. But looking at if they want distance, how am I allowing them to have distance, and maybe with different means of gaining distance. And then in the training area, I do use food and positive reinforcement with it. So, like one of the horses, I've been building a dialogue with her, which started with cat. So it started with that when I would approach, if she looked at me, I would stop and wait for her to relax, and then I would move away. And then in the training area, once she's comfortable with me touching her now in the field also without food involved. And then in the training area, I'm building a dialogue where she has a bucket of chopped hay with hay pellets mixed in. And then when she looks at me, I approach. It's now built up to like me sliding my hand down her leg, and then I mark and give her more hay pellets. And what I find really interesting, and I'm doing this setup with a few of the horses, is that they never run out of hay pellets, and they still look at me a lot. And so I think the interaction is and the control maybe is partly what's reinforcing for them. And so, yeah, and playing with, I think one of the things that's really important about choice, I think, is being very responsive to their subtle body language. So that if there's a day, it's not, just because I've approached her in the field before and touched her, doesn't mean that every day she's going to want me to touch her. And so if I approach and I see that subtle shift in her facial muscles, then me responding in a way that's giving her what she needs, I think is part of choice. And changing.
I love that. Yeah. I particularly like that last bit, like not today, yesterday, fine, not today. I can't do this today. And we know as humans, we might have things that make us feel uncomfortable inside, whether that's a fear-based or a pain-based thing, that some days we just don't feel like it and we're not up for it. When we are expecting horses to comply with something that we've asked them to do, they don't get that option to say today is not up. It's just not going to work for me. I cannot do it today. So I love that you said that. So do you think there are ways, I wonder if Taylor, if you'd like to think about that for us, to lead us into that conversation of how do we let the horse say no? What would you do if your horse said, no, I don't want to go walk to that mat, or I don't want to go out on the trail ride today? How can we offer any choice within that? What's a really easy way for people to start thinking about that, do you think?
Yeah, so one of the ponies that I worked with, she came to the rescue really very wild. And it took me over a year to be able to touch her.
Speaking of difficult horses, yeah,
speaking of difficult horses, she takes the cake on that one. But she definitely she was very sensitive to the environment. And so if there was a storm coming, she was very nervous. And so sometimes we couldn't, so I was working on getting her to put her nose in a halter, which was very difficult. She was terrified of ropes initially too. And so but she was doing really quite well with it. But there were certain days I would go in and there was just no way she was going to do it. She would just turn and walk away. And so on those days I'd say, okay, that's fine. You can walk away when we do this. Let's do something easier. Or what she would actually do is she had a very heightened fear response. So she would put her nose in the halter, and if the halter touched her nose in slightly the wrong way, and this is something we'd been doing for months, she would bolt to the other side of the paddock. And so I would say, okay, that's clearly not a good option for today. And so then we would do something easier. So she liked targeting, and she would follow me if we would do like target, and then I walk away, and then we do another target. And she liked that game. And that was a really easy game for her to play when she was nervous. So on days when she was having a hard time, we would just do something easier.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that's just the nicest thing to be able to do, isn't it? To either bring out that piece of equipment when they're struggling and say, look, is this okay? And then often they'll engage because they know the game. They know they're not going to have a high cognitive load thinking about how they achieve the reinforcer. And it's just a lot nicer for them, isn't it? So that gives her two choices. You could even stick a stationary target in a cone somewhere. So the horse has the option of do the thing you're doing, or they can go over there, or maybe you can have a bucket on the floor where they could go to that bucket. And I think that sort of blows people's minds that, well, my horse won't ever want to do anything. And I think that's really one of the hurdles we are going to have to get over as more modern trainers, thinking about offering choice, is how do we get people on board with the idea that they don't offer less? I don't think they do. I really don't. I see more and more. Christa, I don't know whether you've got any thoughts about, have you dealt with that with any clients? How does your client with the Mustangs deal with the fact that Christa might be taking a long time to do some of these things because she's offering choice? How do we deal with that with and encourage this as a way of working with horses?
Yeah, the owner of the Mustangs is awesome, and she is totally understanding that, they're coming from challenging situations and that it takes time. It just is going to take the time it takes, and yeah, certainly not every client is like that. And that's where, and I think, like we started by talking about the living environments, and I do think that's a great way in sometimes, because I think right now even people are often like saying like, oh, it's raining, let's close the horses into the shelter. I'm like, let's just leave the gate open and they can choose, right, if they want to stand in the rain or stand in the shelter. And I think even just those little things, even in a limited setup, like how many ways can you just allow the horse to say, I'm going to stand outside or stand inside. I'm going to have my hay out of here. I'm going to have my hay out of here. And I think that's maybe a good way in for people to just see that even that's the way we could think about interacting with our horses.
Yeah, I love that. And also maybe, in grooming situations. So if you have a horse who isn't, because we've talked about very sensitive horses so far, and I'd love us to kind of move into, if you have a horse who's completely a cool dude about everything in life, nothing's a worry, should you be thinking of offering choice? Well, we're going to say yes, of course we are, but how we might offer that. And I want to sort of dig back a little bit into what we said at the beginning, this choice which isn't actually choice, where do it or don't do it and not get the thing that you want, and that kind of overriding those emotions and that coercion that sort of starts to come in with that, because you've got the goodies and the bad thing is doing the behavior, but I'll do it because I need the good thing that comes after it. What are our thoughts around people that will say, oh, he wouldn't do it if he didn't want to? Show jumpers, they wouldn't go in the ring and do it if they didn't want to. My horse wouldn't go out on the trail ride and gallop flat out if he didn't want to. So how can we offer like regular horses who seem to be okay? What could we be looking for, do we think? Do either of you have thoughts on that? I hope you both do.
I feel like I work with many regular horses like that.
That's Taylor, yeah.
Like an unfamiliar scenario.
Yeah, I've found, well, I think, starting for the human in a different context, maybe like setting up food puzzles. Like even if you're not training with positive reinforcement, setting up like a enrichment walk where there's like food puzzles or buckets with food and recycling and that kind of stuff for the horse to investigate, I think can help the human watch the horse's body language and start reading that body language and seeing, and even they're just surprised, even like if you have them take a step back, like even if the horse has to be on a lead rope, say, why don't you just walk a little farther back behind the horse and let the horse lead, right? And choose where to go. And I've been amazed at how sometimes people are really surprised and find it really fun to watch their horse, make these choices, even when it's something kind of novel and simple, just like choosing which bucket to go to on the driveway or, which pile of recycling to go to or something like that. Which height to eat off of, like if you have some food up high or food down low, which height do they choose? So I think that can be like a good way in. I do think, I've been thinking a lot about choice in terms of the way that we respond. And so, I was thinking about, for example, like if we're teaching a horse to walk forward, either with positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, So let's say with negative reinforcement, I'm holding a flag behind a horse, let's say, to teach them to walk forward. So beforehand, I'm going to make a plan of what are all the different behaviors that I see that will make me remove the flag, which is what I would assume what the horse would be wanting, what would be important to the horse. So I would say, first of all, if the horse moves forward, I'm going to remove the flag, right? So that's negative reinforcement, assuming it creates more of that behavior in the future. I'm also going to remove the flag, let's say after 10 seconds, because if my horse hasn't got it by 10 seconds, I'm not just going to keep holding it there. Same with positive reinforcement. I'm going to reinforce the horse, either feed if I'm using positive, or remove the flag if I'm using negative reinforcement. Or a third thing would be if I see kind of a suite of stress related behaviors, like tightening of the facial muscles. Maybe the horse lifts their head a little bit. Maybe their ears change. Maybe their eye changes. I'm also going to remove the flag or feed and remove my request from positive reinforcement if I see those. So I think if we're thinking about it in that context, there actually are quite a few ways for the horse to access reinforcement.
Yeah.
But it's about us being responsive to it. And I think one of the questions then next, of course, is if you remove the flag after 10 seconds with your horse sitting still, aren't you teaching your horse to stand still when you hold the flag? And I would say if you repeated it, of course, that is definitely what you're doing. I think the important part of that is to stop after that and reassess and say, do I need to change my setup? Why is my horse not doing this? And this is where I think it's interesting, because people often say, I've heard this said a lot, where like, oh, you don't offer a choice unless your horse is in pain. And I say, how would you know your horse is in pain if you're not offering choice? Like in that example, let's say your horse doesn't, even if I'm doing positive reinforcement, I give the cue to walk on, my horse doesn't respond within a certain time frame. How would I know why my horse doesn't respond if I'm not being responsive to their subtle body language?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say as well, what happens then with that client who's using hopefully gentle negative reinforcement is that they say, but Christa, how else am I going to do it? And then you have your perfect into teaching positive reinforcement, because that is the moment where as humans we go, well, what am I going to do? I will either have to wave the flag harder and make them frightened of it, or oh, how else could I do that? And then you're on hand to, and sometimes we have to hold people's hands to go through that and to come out the other side of it and realize that themselves, rather than us pushing it, us not giving them any choice to learn that. And I think that's the same with our horses, very much so. I love that. I like to turn it a little bit and say, what other behavior can the horse offer for the reinforcement? So they're getting the same reinforcement, but it might be walking to that bucket to get it, or it might be to touch the target you have in your hand. But those conversations take quite a lot of developing, don't they? And just to say to people, if you walk out day one and try it and do something intricate like that, and I'm going to signpost them to both of you to watch things that you share on social media, and I'll include your social media tag obviously in this episode, but also just thinking all the time that you start small, like you say, start by offering it in a place that is maybe just more enrichment based, lifestyle based, and then start to notice how you could do other things. For instance, I think I give my dogs a lot of choice, and I've built a lot of healthy habits with them over the years. But, being 6 weeks on the course where I've been looking at it with a magnifying glass, I realised there's still room for more. This is great. There is still always room for more. So maybe that would be my advice, is don't jump in too quickly and think, oh no, it doesn't work. Yeah, Christa, you've got a webinar coming up with choice, haven't you? So
Yeah.
I will signpost people to pick that up as well, because I think that would be really useful for people who are more interested. But I wonder, could we, in brief last thought, where might you direct, Taylor, you said about the book that you selected for Christa all those years back now. Where might we send people to start their journey on, searching for choice or better ways of doing this? I will put, obviously, your Karen Pryor suggestion in the show notes as well. But any thoughts where people can go and take this going forward?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about, I feel like lately I haven't been doing a lot of horse training reading. I've been doing a lot of my research reading. which is not about choice in horse training. But Christa's webinar, I'm very excited about.
Yeah, that's going to be cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one thing, I think a lot of folks who are doing positive reinforcement training are thinking about choice. And I think there are also probably folks doing negative reinforcement training who are thinking about choice. And I think that so many people have different approaches to it and different ideas about it. And I just think there's so many different ways you can do it. But I think that there's some stuff like even there's the website Enriching Equines, which just has so many great ideas for, they have like it broken down into like, here's how to enrich your horse's stall space, here's how to enrich the paddock. Like there's so many good ideas about how to just do basic enrichment for your horse. So I always send that to people, a lot of folks who are like, what do I do with my horse in my paddock? I'm like, here's a bunch of ideas.
Yeah, cool. I love that. Krista, any thoughts? Obviously, they should come and listen to your webinar when you do that in February, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, I do love the Understand Horses webinars. I feel like they have, and courses, and of course Trudy's work. But I think like Taylor said, like being open-minded, that there are a lot of dialogues about choice. And one of the things I've been looking at for my webinar is actually how, like over the last 100 years in the United States, the different ways that we've looked at choice and thought about choice. Because I think it's important to remember that this actually is not a new concept, that people have been playing with this idea for a long time, and that I think we're all kind of on this trajectory of trying to make life better for our horses. Trainers like Monty Roberts, he says in his old books, he says that choice is basically at the heart of his training system. And even though that choice might look different to how maybe I'm trying to implement it, I think it's important to remember that this is a very broad conversation, and that kind of everyone's going to be on a different path towards offering choice. And it's certainly not straightforward. I'm often in conflict about how much choice to offer and how do I do it when I need to trim the horse's feet who's not quite actually comfortable with it. How do I do that? And yeah, just that it's complex, and I think looking at it from many different angles is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I love that. And I think maybe looking around at people like Barbara Heidenreich, who's done a lot of work in the zoo animal world, where choice is becoming lots more, well, it's been necessary because zoos have been really under the spotlight. So I think that's really, really important, to me, to look at other species training. So, just thinking about my little dog that I've been doing my course with, because I'm videoing, because I'm watching, because I'm seeing the choices he makes when he wants to opt out, or if he gives me a lip lick and says, this is hard. I'm noticing I can't really go more than 3 reps, which I knew, but I was just forgetting and thinking, oh, let's carry on anyway, because I'm human. But when you dig in and you're really careful about it, you start to see those things. All right, three times of the same thing. I have to give him a moment to decide to come back in and say, yes, I want to carry on. And I think we don't do that enough with horses. I think we just kind of go, yeah, well, an hour is a training session, so I'm only asking for 10 minutes. But therefore, we're not actually still offering any choice. Choice can be complex in how we can offer it, or it can be really simple, like, do you want to end now? Or if you don't want to do it, do you want to get the food anyway? Which is for all 3 of us, a massive thing. Free food is absolutely fine. It's not going to make awful horses. But yeah, thank you for the conversation. You're brilliant. I love you both, and I hope that we'll be able to do stuff together in future, because it always excites me to work with young trainers who are having new ideas, and I think that's a really important thing. So thank you both very much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thank you, Trudy.
Thanks for having us. This was great. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to that episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed the process of recording it. Krista and Taylor are students, colleagues, friends, and it always brings everything to life for me when you can discuss those things with your colleagues. If you want to find out more about my training, you can find me at equine.training, and you can find my courses at understandhorses.com. And to note, Krista recently completed my professional horse trainer certificate at Understand Horses, and that is a really deep dive into training. So if you'd like to join that course, there are a couple of places only left now, and that begins in March. So get to understandhorses.com and sign up for that if you'd like to join the next intake on my professional course. There are lots of other courses at understandhorses.com, but just to mention, also coming up at the beginning of March with my colleague Gabriel Lencioni, I also have at the IAABC Foundation, I have my cooperative care course where you can come along for 4 technically, but it's nearly always 5.5 weeks of deep diving into cooperative care. Share your video. There's so much information and you can get so much feedback on your training. So it's a really great course to sign up for. And also to mention my Positive Horse Club. If you think like me and you'd like to be with a group of people who think the same way, get in touch with me. You would be welcome to join my Positive Horse Club, where it's a monthly subscription. You get video feedback on your training once a month. In itself is worth £50. So yeah, and the subscription is way less than that. So do have a look again on understandhorses.com if you're interested in signing up for Positive Horse Club. And later in the year, at the end of June, we have the Understand Horses Live event, which is always amazing. And coming up in September, just to be aware, on Saturday the 26th, we're going to have a whole day of presentations around modern positive reinforcement based training from many different people within the industry, and we'd love you to join us, and there'll be more about that very soon. Just leaves me to say, if you wouldn't mind sharing this with people that you think might be interested in using choice with their equines, that would be awesome. Thank you, have fun and be kind with your training. Until next time.